Hey guys, Ariel over here at Fy Nyth. I wanted to do a little more info about the realities of living with solar power off-grid. If you've been following me for probably way longer than most of you, you might remember I've had a few posts and such about this before. The last major one was when I had a problem where I wasn't getting power into my batteries, and that became a very lengthy process to figure out, getting a new part for the charge controller, and anyway, I'll link to that post down here if you want to check it out. So everything's been working pretty much just flawlessly as expected since then, until maybe 2 weeks ago. So what happened then was I noticed I've got a little monitor where I can look at and see what percentage of full my batteries are, what power is going out, what's coming in, etc. And I noticed that they were getting a little bit behind each day. Now, in the winter, that's fairly normal because I live so far north and we get so many days that are just snowy all day long. In the summer, though, typically it hits 100% full every single day, and so that was unusual. At first, I thought it was partly just because it had been so smoky around here from wildfires, not real close to my house, but across the west, even up into British Columbia and so on. Living in the mountains like this, sometimes when the smoke gets down in this valley area, it kind of gets trapped there and doesn't go anywhere until the air pressure changes and so on. So it's been really smoky, really hazy, definitely cuts down the amount of sunlight, and there have been some clouds and such, so I kind of thought, well, I guess there just hasn't been the full volume of sun coming in like there normally is. We'll go back to having sunny days, it'll go right back up to full. And it wasn't getting far behind. I would just notice it would only get up to, 98% instead of hitting 100% every day. So I wasn't worried about it. Then I went out of town for a few days. Again, I wasn't worried about it at all. In the summer, it's pretty easy to leave my place, even though it can freeze at night, which thankfully we haven't had too many frosts this summer. Everything's pretty easy to just, not worry about. When I came back, I noticed my batteries were the whole way down to like 70-something%. Now that's a long way from being full. You don't want to I have sealed AGM batteries for my power storage because I live in such a cold place. If I had lead acid batteries, they would need to be outside to vent the chemicals that they off-gas, and batteries don't work real well when they get super cold, like -30 or 40 like it can get here. So I knew I wanted them inside to preserve the charge in the batteries and not have them frozen, but I didn't obviously want nasty chemicals off-gassing into my living space. So what I have are absorbed glass matter, AGM batteries, and they're sealed, they don't off-gas anything. But it's also not good to drain them the whole way to zero. If I remember right, the manufacturer's specs on their lifespan when I bought them said if you went from 100% full to zero, they had about 300 charges, and if you went 100% to 75, somewhere in that range and back and forth without going the whole way down, they said that you'd have about 10,000 charges. Now that's a pretty big difference, 300 to 10,000. I assume those are just estimates, but either way, it's a huge difference, and since the battery storage is one of the most expensive parts of my little solar system, I want them to last as long as possible. So I try to keep them in that top range. So when I got home and realized that not only were my batteries not up at 100% or 98%, they were down in the 70s, this was concerning. So my first thought was to check the whole line. If you've seen pictures or videos, you can probably see the solar cable that comes in from where the panels actually sit up the hill to get the most sun in the winter to bring that power down and into the house. So I thought, well, I'll check that whole line. Maybe something disconnected and I clearly had some power coming in. Maybe I'm only getting power from 1 or 2 of the panels instead of all 4 or something like that. So I double checked the whole line. Those connections are all tight. They're a kind of locking connector that it's pretty hard for them to pull apart when you want to take them apart. They're actually a pretty big pain in the ass because it's nearly impossible to push the little clips in and with your fingers and get them popped apart. So that was all good. So I thought, man, why why is my battery bank just getting behind every day? And then I realized something that was not what I expected to be wrong. I realized I had left my little wireless it's not really a router. It gets a wireless signal that's like a cell signal and transports it throughout the house. It's what I use for my internet here being off-grid. I had left that plugged in. Normally I plug it in when I want to use the internet and then I unplug it all the rest of the time. Partially so I don't have those extra waves bouncing around the house, and partially for power use, because when you have a small amount of power, you don't want to waste it, so you turn things off when you're not using them and so on. But just that being plugged in round the clock, and it had been plugged in, I think I'd forgotten it a day or two before I left to go out of town, and it had been plugged in the entire time I was gone. That draw just round the clock, and I have a very small solar setup. I could get a bigger one, I know that. It's just not worth the investment for me with what I use. I just try to be careful about what I leave turned on. Obviously this time I was careless, but what amazed me was how quickly, in just, 4 or 5 days, leaving something that little plugged in, drawing around the clock, drained down my system. The only things that are normally pulling, not round the clock even for those because they turn off and on, my biggest power draw is my fridge. You can probably see behind me. I could have gone with a propane fridge. I didn't want to buy that much propane. I do like having a little fridge and freezer. It's just handy. So I've got a little electric one. That's usually my biggest power user because it will go on and off, around the clock. But just the extra of having that wireless router plugged in was enough to, over that many days, drain my power down that low. Now this was really interesting to me because if I was not on this kind of system that needed monitored, I would have had no idea how much power that uses just leaving some little thing plugged in like that. So even if you're not off-grid or not on any kind of limited power, you probably pay a power bill. So I thought that was really fascinating, and that other people might want to know that even just something that little plugged in all the time when you're not using it can create that much of an extra power draw. This can also be true of other appliances that you think are turned off, like radios or TVs or anything that if it still has a little power button, even if it goes to being red because it's off, or even some things that show no evidence of using any power at all when they're off. People call it a phantom or zombie power draw. They still use a little bit if they're plugged in. So around here, with the exception of the lights, they don't plug and unplug, I just turn the switches off, and the fridge, which stays plugged in, pretty much anything else I use, like I charge my laptop, then I unplug it, I charge a phone, then I unplug it, I plug in my radio CD player while I'm listening to something, then I unplug it, I normally use my internet, when I'm done, I unplug it, unless I forget. But that really can save you a lot of power. So even, like I said, if you're not off-grid and you're not, restricted by having a limited amount of power available, you probably don't care to be paying the power company for excess and phantom and zombie power draws that you're not even aware of. So just something to think about. Whether you're off-grid or not, you might want to try going around your house and unplugging things when they're not actually being used. Or you could plug several things into a power strip, so you can just unplug one power strip instead of having to do a whole bunch of plugs if you've got a lot of electric things. But anyway, that was just something that I wanted to pass on as a tip for you guys, because even though I'm normally, because I need to be so conscious of the amount of electricity I use, it was amazing to me how forgetting one little thing, and it's easy to forget because it's up there in the loft, and you don't really see it. So when you plug it in, then you forget about it and you're not thinking about it and you're gone. It's, it's one that's possible to forget. When you forget one little thing like that, how much extra power that uses and how much that drained my system down in a time of year when normally I'm easily at 100% all the time. So just something I wanted to pass on. If you're off-grid, something to think about. If you're on-grid and you're paying a power bill, something else to think about. Anyway, let me know what your favorite tips are to save power around your place. Have a great day, folks. Thanks for watching.